Greetings, this is Amy Wentley with Chai Knuckles Knitting, and this is episode 2020-16, Short Rows, the Wrap and Turn Method. This is the first of a series of 3 videos dealing with short rows. This first one is on the Wrap and Turn Method. Episode 17 is on the German short row method, and episode 18 is on the Japanese style of short rows. So we're going to get started today with the Wrap and Turn method. Give you a little bit of background first. Short rows are a way of stacking extra fabric in the middle of a piece of work to add either extra coverage or to add shaping. Shaping is achieved by turning the work before you get to the end of the row. That makes it a short row. It's not a full long row, it's a short row that you work. So for instance, looking at this illustration, you'll work to a certain point before the end of your knitting, turn your work and turn again and stack different rows while the rest of your knitting is untouched. And it adds different fabric in the middle. And as we go through this demonstration, you'll see how that works and how that affects your knitting. An important concept in short rows is the pivot stitch, and the pivot stitch is the stitch around which you're going to turn your work. So in this example, you would work up 7 stitches. The 8th stitch is your pivot stitch. So in the wrap and turn method, the pivot stitch is going to be the one that you wrap and turn around. It'll be a little different for German short rows and Japanese short rows, but they have the same pivot stitch. They just do something different with it. So this is a pivot stitch on the right side of your work. This would be the pivot stitch on the wrong side of your work. So let's learn the wrap and turn short row method. So the pros of the wrap and turn short row method is that it's a traditional method. It's been used a lot, at least I know from my experience with patterns written in English, for English-speaking countries. It is a very common method, and you will see this method used a bunch in patterns. So many patterns are written using this method, so it's great to know how to do it because it's out there. Some of the cons with it are it's a little bit difficult to learn and remember. It is often visible on the on your fabric. People don't particularly like that. It distorts the stitches a little bit. The back side isn't as pretty as the front side, which, doesn't matter if you're wearing the back side next to your skin. But some people don't like that. If you look in the description of this video and you look in the notes on the blog, it will have a little box like this that will tell you how to convert wrap and turn to German or wrap and turn to Japanese short rows. Now you don't know those yet, so this doesn't mean much to you right now, but if you check out the notes, you'll see how you can modify a pattern so that if it's written for wrap and turn, you can actually execute it in German or execute it in Japanese with just a little bit of modification to your patterns. Okay, so for the wrap and turn short row method, what you will be doing is you will be working partway along your work to a certain point to a pivot stitch. You're going to wrap that pivot stitch and turn your work and then work on the other side to another pivot stitch that you will wrap, then you will turn your work and you will continue working. Also in the description, in the YouTube video and on the blog, you will also see a pattern that you can see over here for a little kind of a lozenge, like a little leaf pattern that we're going to use to do these short rows. So we're going to start out here. I cast on 15 stitches and then I purled to the end. So that's where I am now. My next instruction is going to say knit 9 and then wrap and turn. So please knit along with me. Okay, I knit 9 stitches, and then I'm supposed to wrap and turn. So this 10th stitch is my pivot stitch. This is the stitch I'm going to wrap. And the way I wrap when I'm going from a knit stitch to a knit stitch, when I'm on the right side of stockinette stitch here, is I bring my yarn to the front, and then I slip 1 stitch from the left needle to the right needle. That's my pivot stitch. I'm going to take the yarn to the back, and watch, when I take the yarn to the back, that wraps this stitch. There's extra yarn there that's wrapping the stitch. Then I'm going to move the stitch from my right needle back to the left needle again, and there's my wrap. You see it? So I have wrapped. Now all I need to do is turn. So I just turn my work. I don't work to the end of the row. I stop short. That's why it's a short row. And I'm ready to work the next row. The instructions on the next row say to purl 3 and then wrap and turn. So I'm going to go ahead and purl the next 3. 1, 2, 3. Now this next stitch is a new pivot stitch on this side. So the way I handle this on the purl side is my yarn is in the front right now. So I'm going to, you can see the instructions for this right here. I am going to take the yarn to the back. Then I'm going to slip 1 stitch. This is my pivot stitch from the left needle to the right needle, and I'm going to bring my yarn in the front. Now, if you look over, if you turn your knitting over and look towards the front side again, you can see this pivot stitch is wrapped now. There's the wrap. Turn it back to this side, and you take the stitch from the right needle back to the left needle. So that wraps this stitch. You can see how it's wrapped now, front and the back. And then we wrapped it, so now we turn it. Okay, there you go. Now if you look at the front side of your knitting now, you will see a stitch here that you just wrapped. If you look back over here, you'll see the other stitch that you wrapped earlier. Okay, and what you have now too, if you look very closely at that, you've got more rows knitted in here now than you have at the end. So you are shaping a little dome here. Okay, so the next instruction says knit 3, pick up and work the wrap, and then wrap and turn. Okay, so pick up and work the wrap. What that means is we're going to go ahead and knit 3 stitches here, and we're going to get to this stitch that has a wrap on it. But we don't want that wrap to stay there because it looks like a purl bump in the middle of our pretty stockinette stitch. So we're going to want to pick up that stitch and work it with the pivot stitch that's on the needle. That's what pick up and working means. So let's go ahead and knit those 3 stitches. 1, 2, 3. And then what we want to do is we want to pick up this wrap at the base of the stitch and work it together with the pivot stitch on the needle. So we're going to bring our right needle under that wrap, and then we're going to take the right needle and insert it in the pivot stitch as if to knit, and we're going to want to work those 2 stitches together. So you're going to pull the yarn through both the pivot stitch and its wrap, and it will leave a nice stitch there on the front. So the vocabulary I use for that is that I processed that wrap and turn. Okay, I processed that stitch. Okay, so I knit 3, I picked up and I worked the wrap, and now I'm going to do another wrap and turn. So we're on the knit side again. My yarn's in the back, so I'm going to bring my yarn to the front. I'm going to slip the stitch from the left needle to the right needle and take my yarn to the back to wrap it. Take my stitch from the right needle to the left needle That stitch is now wrapped. There's the wrap. And now I'm going to turn. There you go. So the next instruction says, purl 4, pick up and work the wrap, and then wrap and turn. So I am going to purl 4, I'm going to pick up and work the wrap. Now on the purl side, this is going to be a little different. If you'll see, this is my pivot stitch, and you can see that it has the big wrap at the bottom. Okay. What I want to do is I want to turn over my work and see the wrap on the other side. You see it there? And I'm going to put my right needle under that wrap from the front side, and I'm going to stick it on my left needle like a stitch, and make sure that this is oriented correctly so that the front leg is to the right and the back leg is to the left. Excuse me. And then I am going to purl those two together. And then the next instruction says to do another wrap and turn. So I'm on the purl side, my yarn is in the front. I'm going to want to take it to the back, slip the stitch from the left needle to the right needle, bring the yarn to the front, slip the stitch from the right needle to the left needle. It's wrapped now. Do you see the wrap? Now I'm going to turn. Okay, so that shows you how to do wrap and turns on both the front and the back side, and how to pick up and process the stitches on the front and the back side. Now I'm going to work ahead for a little bit until we get down to near the end. So I am going to work to step number 15, and I will be right back with you. Hello, I'm back. I decided to work through row 13 here in the instructions because I want to show you how this works. When you were doing the first few rows, you were starting with a small number of stitches and growing. So knit 3, purl 4, knit 5, purl 6, knit 7, purl 8. So as you were expanding out that way, you always had to stop along your way and pick up and work a wrap and then do a wrap and turn because you were moving out this way. Now that you're making less and less stitches, you're not running into the wrapped stitches. So you don't need to work any wrapped stitches because you aren't knitting those. So let me show you how that works. So I just finished row 13. I had purled 5 to 1 stitch before the last wrap stitch, and I wrapped the stitch. Okay, so now I am here on knit 4 to 1 stitch before the last wrap stitch, and I'm going to wrap and turn. So I'm going to knit 4, and you can see when you look closely at your knitting that you're going to come up on, I knit 4. You can see my wrapped stitch here. You can see the collar around the bottom. This one doesn't have a collar, but this one does. It very clearly has this extra lump under it. That's the wrap. So I'm stopping 1 stitch before, and I'm going to wrap and turn this stitch. So see, I didn't have to process any of these other earlier wrap and turns I did because I didn't get to those yet. We'll show you when that's going to happen. But right now I want to wrap and turn this stitch, so I'm going to bring my yarn to the front, slip from the left to the right needle, take my yarn to the back, slip from the right to the left needle, and turn. That was wrapped. Now I'm turning. Okay, and the next instruction says to purl 3 to 1 stitch before the last wrapped stitch, and then wrap and turn. So I'm going to purl 3, 1, 2, 3, and there's 1 stitch here. Then you can see the stitch right next to it has the extra collar on it. That's a wrapped stitch. So I'm stopping 1 stitch before the last wrapped stitch, and I'm going to wrap and turn that stitch. So I take the yarn to the back, move from left to right, yarn to the front, move from right to left, and turn. So now what I have here on my work, you can see this really well, is I have a bunch of wrapped stitches, 1, 2, 3, 4 wrapped stitches up this way, and 4 wrapped stitches going up the other side, 1, 2, 3, 4. And I've come to near the end of the work. So the next instruction says, knit to the end, picking up and working wraps as you go. So here's my piece, and I'm going to knit. This is a regular stitch. This is a regular stitch. So is this one. But now this is a stitch with a wrap. See the wrap down there? It's got a collar. So I'm going to pick up that wrap, insert my needle as if to knit, pull the yarn through both of those loops. You can pick it up like that if you need to. And that one is processed. So I'll go ahead and process the next one. So I come from underneath, insert as if to knit, wrap the yarn and pull it through both of those loops. That's my second stitch processed. This is another wrapped stitch. I'll go ahead and work those together. And this is my last wrapped stitch. Insert into the wrap, insert into the stitch, and pull the yarn through both of those loops. And then I am at the end. I will just knit to the end. No more wrapped stitches. And then this last says purl to the end, picking up and working wraps as you go. Now I've already worked all the wraps on this side, and I would like to point out to you, remember I told you that it does look a little bit messy on the back? So you can see how that is a little bit messy there from those purl wraps. Okay. And so the next instruction says purl to end, picking up wraps as you go. And for the first half here, I'm not going to have any wraps to pick up because I just did that before I turned, when I pick up and processed all those wrapped knit stitches. So I'm just going to keep going until I run into a stitch that has a wrap on it that I need to process. And so here I am. Here's the first one. This is a purl, so that means I have to sneak around to the other side of my work and pick up that wrapped stitch, that wrap, put it on my needle, and purl it together with the pivot stitch. So that's one stitch processed. I'll go ahead and take this wrap, put it on the left needle, purl the two together. That's 2 processed. Go ahead and pick up the wrap from the front, put it on my left needle, purl 2 together. And one more time, I'm going to pick up the wrap from the front side, put it on my left needle, make sure that stitch is in the correct orientation, right leg forward, wrap, pull through, and then purl 2, and I'm at the end of the row. Then all that we need to do to finish this leaf is to knit 1 row all the way to the end and then bind off in pattern. So see how the shaping worked. You have all this extra fabric that you created in the middle here. This is often used for like a, it can be used for a sock toe, a sock heel, or just to do some shaping. So that is it for the wrap and turn. Please view my videos on the German short row method. That's episode 17, and the Japanese short row method, which is episode 18. Thank you. We'll see you soon.